The bells that morning didn't sound like celebration. They sounded like metal bowls struck underwater, distant, heavy, wrong. I was standing behind a stone column near the back of St. Gabriel's, holding my breath like I was trespassing on my own life. Somewhere inside that honey-colored nave, a man I loved for 7 years lifted his eyes toward a future that didn't include me. He was promising forever to the one person I had called my best friend. I didn't cry. Not then. The body has a way of protecting itself when the knife is still inside. You go numb so you don't shake it deeper. What I felt instead was a practical, almost clinical curiosity. How did we get here? What were the steps, the tiny choices, the polite agreements, the cracked jokes at midnight that turned into cracks in the wall? And when did love rearrange itself around me like furniture I'd been walking around in the dark? If you want to understand, we have to start at the washing machines. It was late September, 7 years earlier. A sticky night where the city tried to cool itself by breathing through alleyways. I had just finished a double-shift diners and dishes, and the fluorescent lights in our building's basement hummed like tired bees. There was a handwritten sign over the coin slot, "Kick it twice." I kicked it twice and it took my quarters. Anyway, when I bent to retrieve my basket, a man's laugh drifted from the doorway. "Let me guess," he said, "it also needs a motivational speech." He was tall, in an imperfect way, shoulders a little narrow, hair in that middle zone of trying, but his smile landed like relief. He carried a matching basket and that soft, embarrassed grin of someone new to a building where the windows stick and the elevator has opinions. "Daniel," he said, offering a hand. "Apartment 3B. My washing machine is theoretical." "June," I said. 2A. This one eats quarters when it's anxious." We ended up sharing the machine, then the bench, then the silence. He asked about my second job like he meant it. I asked about his graduate program without pretending to understand the acronyms. When my dryer stopped spinning like a drunk carnival ride, he talked me through taking the lint trap apart. He stayed until my socks were warm and folded. I didn't fall in love that night, but I fell into something else, into a calm I didn't have to earn, into the possibility that not every conversation needed to prove I was worth listening to. The next week he knocked again, this time with 2 bowls and a pot of tomato soup that tasted like someone's childhood. He called the soup cheap and cheerful. He called me brave for working 2 jobs. I learned he couldn't whistle, and he learned I could repair anything with duct tape and 3 paper clips. That winter, we learned which corners of the apartment kept heat like secrets. We wore his sweaters he had exactly 2, and we stretched our dollars by keeping the lights off and talking in the glow of the fish tank in the hallway. There was a neon tetra named Franklin. We took turns saying goodnight to him because it seemed rude not to. Daniel's thesis was on something about data ethics and decision trees. And I used to joke that if our love was a dataset, we were a strange outlier, 2 people who should have missed each other, and DIDN, single quotes, T. We were poor in that stubborn, tender way that feels like a team sport. When my manager cut my hours, Daniel picked up freelance tutoring. When Daniel's advisor demanded rewrites that turned his brain into a knot, I left notes on the fridge. "You can do hard things." I packed him lunches with more starch than strategy, but he ate them like I'd invented food. When the sink exploded in January and the landlord ignored my voicemail, we watched a video about P-traps and fixed it at midnight. The next day Daniel said, "Partners." And I said, "Partners," because that's what we were. Everyone else said we were playing house, but we knew what the work felt like. I always believed love was mostly verbs. I loved him by holding the line when the rent was due and his stipend was late, by staying up to quiz him on terms that sounded like alien dialects, by putting gas in the car and humility in my pocket. He loved me by remembering my mother's birthday when I forgot, by making the bed with military corners so the day had a clean doorway, by pressing his palm to my forehead when I worked myself into a fever and saying, "June, sleep." When he graduated, we celebrated with takeout in cardboard boxes, the fancy kind that folds like a purse. He wore the robe like it didn't belong to him, and maybe In some complicated corner of his brain, it didn't. No one in his family had worn one. My mother sent me a text that said, "Proud of you both," and I remember thinking, "Both?" The sentence held me like two hands. That summer he took a junior position at a tech firm that had nap pods and kombucha on tap. I moved from nights to the early morning opening shift at the diner so I could wave to him from the window of the bus. We were constantly tired and constantly hopeful. We hunted for an apartment with better light and a less homicidal faucet, but rents rose faster than promises. So we stayed, and stapled fresh images over the old ones. I met Claire again in a grocery aisle that smelled like pears. I say again because she'd been my friend since we were 15 and our English teacher accused us of plagiarism because our essays both used the word luminous. We were both luminous and defensive back then. We stayed close until life did that thing where calendars and lovesickness and side hustles steal time. She moved 3 neighborhoods away, then 2 cities, then back. We kept in orbit with a kind of lazy devotion: birthdays, breakups, memes. She saw me first. June. She said my name like relief. June. We hugged in front of the apples like we were auditioning for a reunion commercial. She said, "Is your hair darker?" And I said, "Is your life better?" And we laughed because both answers were yes, and who knows. I brought her home for dinner because that's what you do with history, you feed it. Daniel made pasta with jarred sauce, doctoring it like a surgeon of cheap miracles. Claire turned our 2 chairs and a crate into a conversation pit and made fun of our one crooked picture frame. Daniel laughed harder than my joke deserved, and I noticed only because Claire's jokes usually earned their laughs. She had the kind of smile that made people lean forward. If charisma were a currency, she would have paid our rent. "Tell me everything," she said, stabbing a spiral of linguine. "Leave out nothing." So we told her about the coin-eating washer and Franklin the fish and the sink at midnight. Daniel told her about his new team lead who spoke only in bullet points. I told her about regulars at the diner, Mrs. Pollard, who believed coffee was a personality trait. Jeff, who flirted with omelets, a teenage girl who counted sugar packets like rosary beads and left the best tips in coins. Claire told us about the agency job she'd lost because the company had rebranded layoffs as structural recalibration. We cursed capitalism and washed dishes and played a card game she pretended to teach us while cheating spectacularly. This is where I want to say I noticed a spark and ignored it, because it didn't fit the story I was telling myself. But the truth is smaller than that. The truth is, I noticed that Daniel listened to her the way you listen to a song you already know: comforted, amused, predicted, surprised. I noticed that Claire asked him a second question after the first, not out of politeness but out of appetite. I noticed they talked in the rhythm of 2 people who like their own minds and like each other's minds. 2. I'm not sure when visits turned into habits. Claire came over on Sundays, then Sundays and Wednesdays. She brought wine that tasted like berries and words that tasted like dare. I needed her laughter the way I always had, and Daniel seemed lighter after she left, as if he had set down something he didn't know he was carrying. There are moments I look back on and want to warn myself. The Wednesday when she showed up early with tacos and texted you home. To Daniel, not to me. The Sunday when Daniel asked if I minded if he and Claire went to a talk about design, thinking because I had a 5 a.m. shift. The night I came home to find 2 mugs in the sink and a post-it note. Save you the last slice. JC, there was nothing forbidden in any of it. That's what made it so easy to forgive and so hard to see. I learned the new choreography without being taught. If Claire came over, I worked on invoices in the bedroom a little longer, because their conversation had momentum and mine had receipts. When they shared a podcast recommendation, I listened later, on the bus, mouth dry with a guilt I couldn't name, as if I'd borrowed something intimate. When we all cooked together, I chopped quieter, laughed later, filled my own glass. The first time I saw their text thread, it wasn't a discovery, it was an accident. Daniel's phone lit up on the coffee table with a short, harmless thing made it home, and the preview wore the kind of familiarity that belongs in slippers. I didn't open it. I told myself there are healthy boundaries and trusting partners and women who don't need to check because they are secure. At midnight, I lay awake composing questions that sounded like jokes and jokes that sounded like questions. By morning, I convinced myself I was tired, not suspicious. When Claire told me she'd started a part-time gig at a co-working space near Daniel's office, I felt a flare of relief because proximity is often the illusion of fate. I said, "That's great, so convenient." She pressed her lips into a smile and said, "Right." Then she said, "You look pale. Are you eating?" And I said, "Always," which is what women say when we are worried about something else. Months rearranged themselves into a new normal. Daniel's job became more demanding. I picked up more morning shifts because tips are kinder before noon. We crossed like boats in a narrow channel. I left sticky notes. "You've got this." He left sticky notes, eggs in fridge. Claire sent playlists that made the apartment feel like a better apartment. Sometimes I felt jealous of her certainty. She consumed life like it was a menu, and she was hungry. I had been so busy building a kitchen that I forgot to order. The night everything started changing wore the costume of an ordinary Tuesday. Rain braided the streetlights. The diner's soup of the day was something orange and honest. I came home to Claire at our table with a bottle of wine and an apology in her posture. "I needed to talk to you alone," she said, and her voice arrived on the softest feet. "Daniel's on a late call." I put my bag down like it might explode. "Okay," I said. "I haven't been a very good friend," she said, which is a trap disguised as an admission. It makes the listener responsible for defending you. I didn't defend her. I didn't say, "No, you've been great." Maybe some stubborn part of me was tired of being the person who says it's okay when it isn't. She took a breath and placed her hands flat on the table like she was bracing herself inside a moving car. "I've developed feelings for him," she said. And it wasn't the words but the way they slid so cleanly between us that cut me. We tried to ignore it. We tried to not be this. But it keeps coming back like a tide. I've replayed that moment 100 times, and all the alternate versions collapse back into the same thing. I laughed. A small, desolate sound, unbeautiful. "Claire," I said, and her name felt strange in my mouth. "You're telling me you're in love with my partner in my kitchen." "I'm telling you I'm in love with him," she said quietly, "and I think he's in love with me." I didn't want to say anything until he talked to you. He talked to me an hour later. And if you want to hate someone efficiently, listen for how they make themselves the hero of their own betrayal. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't deny. He didn't lie. He began sentences with "I never meant to hurt you, and I think we both knew something was off, and you've taken care of me for so long." He said the last part like gratitude, but it sounded like a debt he wanted to default on. "We were partners," I said, and the word felt too small suddenly, like we had outgrown it without telling me. "We are partners." He nodded miserably. "You carried us when I couldn't. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. It's just that, with Claire, I feel alive," I finished, because clichés arrive to save cowards. From honesty, you feel alive. He winced. "I'm sorry. There are arguments that burn the house down, and there are arguments that measure the windows." We measured the windows. We divided the books like polite thieves. We wrote a list for the landlord that made no mention of the wreckage. I packed my clothes into black trash bags because I didn't own enough suitcases for an evacuation. Daniel tried to carry the heaviest one, and I said, "Leave it," and the bag split on the stairs. Jeans cascading like resigned bodies, our neighbor from 2C stepped around them with the dignity of a queen. I moved into a room that deserved it. Better word room implies a shape that holds. This space had angles that couldn't make up their mind. A window that opened into a brick wall, and a radiator that hissed like gossip. I cried for the first time, not because he chose her, but because when I reached for my phone at 1 a.m., the person I wanted to text was her. Grief is rude like that. It makes a map of your habits and sets it on fire. You would think the story ends there. Woman loves man. Man loves friend. Woman leaves. But the human nervous system likes closure even when it is a bad idea. So 6 months. Later, I found myself standing behind a stone column in a church that smelled like candles and roses and money, listening to bells that sounded like drowning. I told myself I was there for proof. That closure needs witnesses. That this would be the prescription and the cure. Daniel looked good in a suit in the way men look good when life has given them a script and they are reading it competently. Claire was radiant in a dress that understood her. She has always been good at finding clothes that cooperated with her body. When the priest asked them to say I do, they did. I kept my hands at my sides because if I clasped them, I might pray. And I don't pray anymore. After, I went home and organized my spice rack by color because order is a drug. I cleared my inbox and scrubbed the tub and texted my mother a picture of a plant I had not yet killed. She called me to say, "Baby, planting is a promise." And I didn't know whether to be comforted or called out. The slow part came then. The rebuilding that people romanticize in Instagram captions because they haven't done it sober. I picked up more shifts and learned the names of the construction crew that came in at 6:15 a.m. I took a night class in bookkeeping. Because numbers don't lie unless humans hold them hostage. I said yes to freelancing for a bakery owner who needed someone to keep track of invoices, and then yes to the florist across the street. And then yes to a tattoo artist who didn't believe in calendars. Within a year, I barely recognized my spreadsheet. Within 2, I had a small business with 3 regular clients and a 4th, who paid late but apologized in cookies. If you are waiting for the schadenfreude portion, it wears sensible shoes. Daniel's company pivoted into a corner and then wished itself luck. He landed on his feet. Educated men often do. But there is a tax for burning bridges, even if you are the one who set the fire. The last time I saw him unplanned, at a farmer's market we both pretended to deserve. He looked older in the way of people who manage crises professionally. He told me he was working long hours. He told me Claire was exploring her own thing, consulting, something with brand stories. He told me I looked well, and I said, I sleep now. And we both laughed because the alternative was unseemly. It was almost 3 years to the day when I got the message from a number I didn't recognize. The preview said, June, it's Claire. I stared at it like a wasp on the windowsill. It began, predictable in its careful, vague sincerity. I hope you're doing okay. I think of you often. Would love to talk, if you're open. I closed my eyes and thought of all the versions of myself who would have said yes. The version who still wanted answers. The version who could be flattered by crumbs. The version who thought grace meant letting people take more. I typed, I hope you're well. I don't think a conversation would be kind to any of us. Take care. Then I put my phone face down. Not to punish myself, but to protect the small, precise peace I had grown with stubborn hands. You could end the story, thereon, a boundary drawn like a clean line, but life still loves an epilogue. 6 months later, on a Tuesday the sky couldn't be bothered to color. A woman came into the diner with a face I recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting years later. She sat at the window table, and ordered coffee in a voice that had learned to be careful. When she looked up and saw me, her cheeks flushed with memories I didn't want. She didn't say my name. I didn't say hers. That felt like mercy. When I brought the coffee, she touched the mug like it might teach her a lesson, and said, I heard you started your own thing. The bookkeeping. I did, I said. It's small but it's mine. She stared at me, the way people stare at the sun, when they forget it's dangerous. I'm happy for you, she said, and I believed her because the sentence had no room for anything else. After a small, quiet moment that belonged to some other life, she added, I made a mess. I am making one. I don't know how to stop. I wanted to ask her if the mess was the natural consequence or the point. I wanted to tell her that some of us are gardeners and some of us are weather and some of us are both. Instead, I said, because I am kind to a fault until I learn new definitions. People can change. She smiled without using her mouth. People can, she said. I'm not sure I am one of them. I took her order. I brought her eggs. She ate them like penance. When she left, she tipped more generously than our history deserved. and I used the money to buy myself a plant I couldn't name. The bell over the door dinged again, and my boss shouted an order, and the day became the day. On my break, I sat on the back steps and let the air have me. I thought about the woman I had been behind that stone column, the woman who counted wedding bells like gunshots. I thought about the woman who now counted invoices, who had learned the soft, ferocious discipline of choosing herself without asking permission. There is a temptation, when telling a story like this, to make the moral large and poetic, to say something like, "In losing them, I found myself." And while that is true in the bumper sticker way, it is also incomplete. I didn't find myself like a necklace behind a dresser. I built myself like a bookshelf, board by board, unspectacular, strong, level, useful. The miracle isn't that I survived, it's that I learned the difference between love and proof that I deserve it. Once, on a quiet Monday, a regular named Mrs. Pollard slid me a folded napkin. Inside was a quote printed in a font that tried too hard. "Sometimes the closure you seek is a life you build that no longer requires it." I pretended to roll my eyes. Then I taped it inside my cabinet door where only I would see. If you need a practical ending, here it is. I moved into a brighter apartment with a window that opened onto a tree. I stopped buying wine because I realized I didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed the idea of holding something that felt like an answer. I learned to cook one thing very well, lemon chicken with too much garlic, because competence is its own kind of faith. My mother started texting me photos of the sky. I started replying with photos of my plant, which I finally learned is a pothos, stubborn and forgiving. If you need a sentimental ending, here's another. I sometimes take the long way home just to walk past a pet store where they keep a tank of neon tetras. I always say hello to Franklin, even though it isn't him and never was. In the reflection on the glass, my face looks like mine again. Not younger, not untouched, just mine. And if you need the quiet truth we rarely say out loud, it is this: I did raise him. In the way women are trained to raise men, they love feeding dreams, budgeting hope, giving patience a daily allowance. I taught him how to believe in himself because I was too busy to notice I'd stopped believing in me. He married my best friend because desire takes the path of least resistance, and loyalty is a muscle you have to exercise on purpose. They built something out of what they took. I built something out of what I had left. On some nights, when the city hums like a gentle machine and my hands smell faintly of lemons from the chicken and ink from receipts, I sit on the sill and let the air knit itself around me. Somewhere, bells ring for strangers. Somewhere, vows are taken, and hearts are broken, and furniture is moved through narrow hallways that turn us into acrobats and comedians and very small gods of our small households. Somewhere, a woman stands in the back of a church and stays upright when her world tilts. Here, in my home, I practice a softer ritual. I make a pot of tea. I wash a single mug and leave it to dry. I water the pothos until the soil is dark and quiet. I tell the room, which is mine and only mine, I'm alive, and I feel it answer back, I know. That is the ending I can live with. No triumph trumpeted. No punishment served. Just an ordinary, durable joy that does not owe its existence to anyone's permission. If you are standing where I stood behind a column, behind your own heartbeat, behind the life you planned, may you hear me clink this spoon against this mug and know, there is a life beyond the bells. And the first person you promise anything to, there is yourself.